Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming. I am Brian Abernathy. I'm the first Deputy Managing Director, and I'm in charge of the coordination for the Democratic National Convention. For an event like the DNC, there's not a city in the country I'd rather be in than the city of Philadelphia. The experience of our police department, our fire and emergency management personnel bring to special events is extensive, and our partnerships with state, local, and federal officials are strong. I'd like to thank all of them for making the planning for this event as smooth as it has been. As you know, the United States Secret Service released detailed information this morning on the security perimeter around the Wells Fargo and a list of resulting traffic restrictions. They're on hand today, as well as representatives from the Philadelphia Police Department, the Pennsylvania State Police, PennDOT, and the Office of Emergency Management to answer any of your questions. So at this point, we are asking residents to review information on our websites, www.phila.gov/DNC. We're also encouraging residents to sign up for OEM's alert system at www.phila.gov/ready and to follow police and city on Twitter, Philly Police and Philadelphia.gov. Finally, I do want to say that Philadelphia's Democratic National Convention is an incredible opportunity for the city. It's our chance to remind the rest of the country that we're a world-class city, to highlight our landmarks, our businesses, and our neighborhoods. More importantly, though, Philadelphia is nothing without our residents. We expect an air of excitement around this week. The convention is going to be an event like many of us have never seen before, and we're hoping that everyone stays, that businesses stay open, and that we show a national audience exactly how great Philadelphia is. And with that, I think we're happy to answer your questions.
Yeah, my name is James Henry. I'm the Special Agent in charge of the Secret Service Philadelphia office. If you've got a specific question, I mean, it all.
Because we're radio, can you tell our listeners exactly the restrictions for traffic around the Wells Fargo Center? What streets are open, what streets are.
I mean, if you refer to the map, it's much easier than me trying to recite them to you in this forum. I mean, essentially, if you look at, again, going back to the map, Broad Street, both north and southbound, essentially from 95 up to.
Broad Street, you know, it would make it much easier. Yeah, Joe. Chief Inspector Sullivan is head of the tactical portion of a lot of the planning process with the street, so he can answer that for you.
Yeah, so the street closures will go into effect, and I want to emphasize the minimal street closures around the Wells Fargo Center. Beginning Friday night, there'll be restrictions on the northbound and southbound Broad Street off-ramps for construction purposes, but those ramps will open up again on Saturday morning. By 12 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, or roughly around 12 o'clock, you will see Broad Street will be closed from Patterson Avenue to Terminal. There will be Broad Street will be closed from Patterson Avenue to Terminal. Patterson Avenue will be closed from Broad Street to 7th. Terminal Avenue will also be closed from Broad Street to 11th. As by Sunday, that will push out, and then Patterson Avenue will be closed from Broad Street to 20th to authorized vehicles only, and then Broad Street from Patterson up to Packer Avenue will also be closed. And it will not be closed, but it will be restricted to authorized vehicles only. The last stage will be, there will be closures on 10th Street and 11th Street and Hart Ramp Street. Hart Ramp Street will go from Broad Street to 11th Street. Darien Way will shut down, and 10th Street and 11th. 10th and 11th will be shut down from Packer down to Terminal Avenue. And then the full closures at that point will be in effect. The Broad Street line will continue to run. Patterson Avenue Station will disembark passengers on the north side of Patterson Avenue. and that will be available to everyone. And the Secret Service is making arrangements for taxis, Uber, and other forms of transportation to get very close onto the footprint, where they will get more specific instructions how to approach the area and disembark their passengers. That's all being coordinated. Does that answer your question?
If I could have a follow-up with the Secret Service head.
He actually did a really good job.
Why did the Secret Service determine that this was the permanent perimeter? I know we're going to go down and speak to people in South Philly where we're going to say this might be a hardship to them. Why was this particular perimeter selected?
Well, that's based on the security precautions that we take defines our perimeter. Our perimeter is no larger than it needs to be, and we determined for this particular event, that's what the perimeter needed to be. I can't go into the specific reasons why that is, but again, it's not any larger than it needs to be for the security planning purposes. I'm not going to go into the specifics of the height. It's more or less the same fencing that we used during the papal visit, and you can see through it from a distance. I'm not going to go into the specifics of the placement of the fencing, but it basically, if you look at the perimeter on the map, again, from 11th to Broad, from Pattison to Terminal, that's the general placement of the fencing. Well, I'm not going to speak to the giant traffic box, but the papal visit, like all of our national special security events, we always conduct an after action with our partners, which is what we did with the papal visit as well. So, I mean, I think really, and you can't compare, obviously, the papal visit to the Democratic National Convention. It's much, much more confined area. It's minimally impactful. I know it impacts some people, but generally minimally impactful on businesses, residents, traffic. I think something like this is what we learned is maybe to try to communicate to the public a little bit sooner, and that's something that we did in conjunction with the police department for this event. Our agents, along with the police department, went out, talked to the affected residents, talked to the affected businesses to make sure that they knew early on what to expect.
Sir, there'll be an extensive traffic detail out there. Be a large deployment of officers specifically to deal with the traffic issues. We'll be using VMS signs. Director Phillips will be getting out information to the public through pa.gov alerts. There'll be intermittent traffic closures. We will have marches and protest activity, but we certainly have the manpower to handle this. We're getting a lot of help for the Pennsylvania State Police. They'll be coordinating with us to keep traffic flowing on the highways, and we'll be working together. There will be some traffic delays, but I think when you see the plan, the magnitude of the plan, the complexity of it, how far outreaching it goes, and how much cooperation we have from the Pennsylvania State Police and our partners in the county, I think it'll be minimal. There will be some impact on the neighborhood directly adjacent to Wells Fargo Center and FDR Park, but we're going to keep that to a minimum. No, we'll escort the protest to Pattison Avenue and facilitate everyone to very quickly get into and easily get into FDR Park. And we're meeting with different protest groups, as I just came from my office and just did. So there's a lot of really good communication between the larger protest groups and the police department, so that we're dealing with these issues ahead of time. So everyone's on the same page, or most of us are all on the same page of music right now. No.
How are you going to handle protesters who are demonstrating without permits, or protesters who are in areas that are not designated for protesters? Spoken to some of these groups who said, we have permits, but we're not going to do what we've been permitted for. We're going to go somewhere else or do something else. How is that going to be handled?
So obviously, with any convention, you're going to have pop-up protests, those without permits. We will deal with them as they come up. We will not make any predetermined ideas or notions about how we're going to handle each one. We will take into account what the area looks like at the time, how it will impact the protesters themselves, as well as the people in the area. So the bottom line is we've been very fluid in dealing with protesters and demonstrators for the last probably 18 months or so. And we are relatively confident about how we do that. And we know that these things will happen, and we'll take them as they come. That's the bottom line. But we're not prepared to say, you know, in a solid fashion, this will happen or this won't happen, because that's not what we want to do.
Can you comment on how you want your officers on the street to deal with protesters? We saw last night, there's going to be one tonight. Obviously, your officers are known to be very calm and courteous to these folks. Is that just something that you expect to see every day in this DNC?
Absolutely. It's not only is it an expectation, it's what we train for and what we train to. And so the men and even some women that aren't present here today, the strong leadership that will be on scene help us to do that. And we've got a cadre of officers that have been very much involved in many of the protests that we've had. And so we're fairly adept at dealing with this. Clearly, you know, conventions bring a whole set of people from around the nation, some of whom we've never met before. I mean, the chief did mention some of the groups that we interface with, and that obviously helps us. But we are prepared to deal with just about anything that comes up. Again, you know, we're not new to conventions, and we're not new to large-scale events, which is critical to point out.
Can you comment real quick on how you will deal with legal overnight campers by any chance?
Well, I mean, the city has already put out their plan about what is prohibited with regard to that. Again, it's not something that we're encouraging in prohibited areas. We will deal with situations like that as they crop up. We're not going to make those determinations right here. And when you deal with large-scale protests and events, you have to be fluid. And so we will not be boxed into a corner about what we will or will not do. We'll have to make those determinations when those times come.
The city normally, unlike some of its neighboring large cities, has had a policy of being kind of hands-off and not requiring permits. Can we expect to see a more aggressive presence with, you know, the Secret Service and the Democratic leadership in town?
Is that a question for the Secret Service or?
Well, no, it's for you, because I don't imagine the Secret Service is going to be out arresting protesters.
No, you mentioned them. That's why I wanted to be clear.
It's a little bit, I just ask because it's a little bit more high security than your average.
Well, it is. I mean, you're talking about presumptive nominees or presidential nominees, so it stands to reason that, you know, that kind of security is going to be ramped up. But with regard to how we interface with people, we're going to do what we've been doing. And we're going to respect the Constitution and everyone's right to protest. And I think the city and the police department, as well as other entities, have done a pretty good job at demonstrating that and trying to convey that to everyone involved. And that's what we're going to continue to do.
Will the state police be working with the PPD on dealing with protesters?
The state police has a pretty significant response to this, but the lion's share of what they'll be doing will be in the way of support on the highways. They've got a significant package that will be helping us, but in terms of the protests, for the most part, it will be Philly PD primarily, and obviously if we need their assistance, they're always there, but primarily it'll be us.
How will the police be dressed at these protests? Will they be riot gear visible?
No, we don't. You see how we're dressed right now? Save for a blue uniform for police officers, that's primarily what you'll see. There'll be some people who are in specialty units that every day wear those particular uniforms. They have nothing to do with the DNC. That's just how they dress each and every day, whether it's someone from Homeland Security or SWAT or what have you. But we will not be outfitted in anything special for the DNC. I mean, it's going to be soft clothes. We're going to deal with this just as it's a peaceful event, because you know, with any convention, 99% of the people will come here and protest and demonstrate peacefully. And we respect that. We will continue to do that, and we honor it. And that is our pledge to those protesters as well as the delegates that are coming.
Will there be a list of prohibited items in FDR parks for protester safety?
Well, I think all that's going to be put out on the website, right? Yeah. Secret Service has all that out. That'll be listed.
For FDR Park, though, not for the convention center.
Well, yeah, I mean, you want to comment on that for?
Yes, there will be a different list that we put up on. Hi, Sam Phillips, Director of Emergency Management. We're working right now with both the Police Department, Parks and Recreation, who actually own that space, and the Fire Department to just develop a list of prohibited items. It really does focus on public safety, open flames, for example. We also want to increase signage around the lake that's down there and really discourage the desire to maybe take a swim in that lake. So some stuff like that for really demonstration safety.
What will be allowed generally for protesting there? Will protesters be able to stay in FDR parks for 3 to 4 days? What is going to kind of be allowed in that park?
So I think Commissioner Ross answered that, and he's going to just be very fluid in that, and I'll let him answer that question.
I mean, we're not prepared to tell you that, you know, absolutely, we're going to enforce this way in one shape or another. I mean, clearly, we're not encouraging that down there, but again, there's a lot of things we don't encourage. We don't necessarily encourage unpermitted protests, but we still allow some of those to go on. And so you make those judgments as you go along. And so, again, if you feel like that's not clear enough, I mean, that's just the way it is, though. I mean, it's about being fluid and in the moment and make those judgments while you're doing what you do.
If I can just follow up on that. Why was FDR Park selected as the location for protest? We've spoken to a lot of protest leaders on W York, and they're complaining that you guys put them in FDR Park and they're nowhere close to the delegates. Delegates won't be able to hear them and basically put them in.
Yeah, actually, I would say that a lot of protesters actually asked to be in FDR Park. It is in close proximity to the delegates. Buses will drive right by them. They will be seen and they will be heard. And that was actually very important as we selected FDR, was to make sure that protesters had the ability to be heard by delegates as they go forward.
Brian, can I follow up on that? Some of the delegate groups that we've spoken to in New York said they haven't had their protest. They've applied for protest permits, but they haven't gotten one specifically is a group that's going to start on the 26th, an African American group, at 2 o'clock from Broad and St. Diamond. Are you going to approve their permit? When's everybody going to know if their permit is approved?
I mean, I think we are going through the permit approval process now. Certainly, we will make sure that we respond to folks in a timely a manner as possible. But we are trying to be thoughtful and considerate as we go through it, to the point of having pretty ongoing conversation with those protest groups. So they should expect an answer shortly.
Question for the Philly and potentially state wants to take it too. During the 2000 RNC, the city and state police came in for a lot of criticism because the state police at least appeared to be used to circumvent some of the restrictions of the city police. I know that the state police aren't bound by the state police directives, but will they be respecting all of your First Amendment sector directives during DNC?
The short answer is yes. I mean, we've collaborated, and they're going to work very closely with us with regard to how we decide to police the event, and most of it will be surely in the form of assistance, so I don't think that's going to be an issue this time.
If he's specifically referring to state police's rent undercover to infiltrate protest groups ahead of the RNC, I'm willing to go on record and say that state police will not be used for that.
Well, do you want to comment? Because my answer to that would be a simple no, but, all right. All right. We're not looking to use those tactics, okay? So you got me on record for saying that, and that's okay.
Commissioner, do you expect to make a lot of protesters arrest? And just for their own information, what is an absolute no-no when you actually expect to make an immediate arrest? Of course, just guidelines to let they know.
Well, there is no expectation about making arrests. I mean, that's something you do because it's required. We're not looking to make arrests. That is not our plan. Obviously, if the situation warrants it, then that's what we'll do, but only as a last resort. I mean, again, most of the people that'll be here will be here peacefully. You do know from covering these events, there are groups that wish to be arrested sometimes, and they do so peacefully, and some of them actually will let you know that. But our expectation is that the lion's share of folks will not choose to do that. They will demonstrate via their permit. And if there's something that is an exigent circumstance, then we'll deal with that accordingly. Those are different depending on circumstances. So it's no way to really box that in completely and completely encapsulate that and know what every one of those will be. Again, being fluid, and you'll hear me say it 100 times, is what we will be. We're that way with these protests. They were that way last night. They'll be that way, they were that way a couple days ago. It doesn't mean arrests won't happen, it just means that we try to make that a last resort.
Where will those protesters that may happen to be arrested be taken to?
Well, it depends on the circumstances, but the lion's share will probably be in the form of a code violation notice. And so if people have their requisite identification after being relocated, usually for safety reasons, they will be written that code violation notice and they will be released somewhere in the area.
Could you let the public know what other local or state agencies besides the state police will be coming in to assist the Philly police?
Well, the list is pretty expansive. I mean, I think that was put out in the press release. I think that was in the press release, so, yeah. But, I mean, clearly, you know, many of them are standing here today. You got the FBI, you got the Secret Service, Pennsylvania State Police, obviously Capitol Police, SEPTA Police to some degree. I mean, I think you got a particular question, though.
Yeah, I'm sorry, maybe I asked it the wrong way. In terms of not federal, but, you know, police from the surrounding Pennsylvania counties, New Jersey counties, Delaware, like mutual aid system.
Oh, yeah. So here's the advantage of being a large city with mutual aid. Most of the folks that we have will be Philadelphia PD that will be on the front lines in a position to deal with the circumstances that you're alluding to. Our mutual aid, primarily with the 5 counties, they will be used largely in a special capacity, so many people will not even see them. And so that won't be an issue with regard to policies and procedures that may contrast with ours is ultimately what you're getting at, I think. So. The plan right now, again, on the line primarily will be Philly PD. It's not that other agencies may not assist, but not in that regard. So it's not going to be a major concern of ours with regard to mutual aid and conflicting policies.
So these law enforcement agencies are limited to the 5-county Pennsylvania area?
Primarily.
Could you comment real quick on the role of private security contractors for security for the DMV?
Well, at large-scale events, we always have private security, but, I mean, they're not going to be involved in dealing with protesters in the way that you would think. So, I mean, they would deal with venue issues and so forth and so on, but that's not going to be an issue for us here.
What kind of other things will they be doing? What kind of security, what kind of activities will they be carrying out? Do you know?
Well, I don't want to comment on that right now. I mean, but it really doesn't have much to do with protesters at all, if anything at all.
How will this impact people living near the Wells Fargo?
I'm sorry?
How will this impact people living close to Wells Fargo?
Well, I mean, obviously, if you live down there, there'll be significant traffic in the way of police activity and obviously delegate buses and things like that. But, you know, we're going to work very hard with the neighborhoods that we already have in coordinating with them. The chief already talked about having details that will be down there specifically as we do with Eagles games and the like, to make sure that those neighborhoods are policed adequately while an activity is going on. So I'm not going to be misleading and say there'll be no impact, but we're going to try to minimize that as much as possible.
Any possibility that Hillary's acceptance speech be moved to Lincoln Financial?
I'm sorry?
Any possibility that Hillary's acceptance speech be moved to Lincoln?
Oh, that's beyond me and above my pay grade. I don't know.
Liberalize some of the nuisance times, how is that going to change, or will that change how your department polices during this time?
Say the first part, because I was the tail end of that question.
Decriminalizing some of the so-called nuisance times?
Right.
How will that impact, or will it impact how your department polices during this time?
Well, I mean, in essence, a lot of the other instances, like the RNC, they were coded a disorderly conduct, which is a criminal offense, but it's still a summary. In many instances, in terms of the way we were doing business recently, that was something an officer would write on the street anyway. But in this case, and unfortunately, a lot of those cases were getting thrown out. I think the instance at Fox, all of them got thrown out a couple weeks ago. When we had some protesters in front of Fox 29 blocking the street, they all got thrown out. And so we don't really have an interest in criminalizing a bunch of people who are out peacefully protesting. It doesn't really serve a purpose. It detracts from our mission in the regard that it takes a lot of time. So the people who will have identification, and I believe the ACLU is encouraging that on their website, they will be in large part released not far from the scene, and we'll deal with that as it comes. But just in terms of facilitating the whole process, we think it's going to make some of it streamlined for us and for the protesters, and so that they can get out of the system.
Can you touch on, I mean, the events that happened in Baton Rouge and the other shooting that was conducting, is there any fear that some of those events could spill over into this and people could take issue with the police officer?
Well, I mean, there are going to be protests tonight. There were protests last night. There are probably going to be other protests leading up to the DNC. So I think we would be remiss and naive to believe that those won't continue. How they will be conducted, I mean, that's up to the individual group. Fortunately, when you're in your own hometown, as the chief alluded to, you cultivate relationships with people. I got 2 calls from 2 separate groups today that are marching, and they both called to indicate when and where. And so that's the good thing, and that's the benefit of having relationships. Now, everyone won't do that, and that's their right. But we expect that these protests and demonstrations will continue. It's just a reality.
Commissioner, I understand you're sending some people to Cleveland. What was their role there? What do you hope that they tell you?
Purely as observers. Purely as observers. They'll go there, and that's a common practice in the industry. If you have a large-scale event, there will be people coming here as well to watch us in different capacities, to learn for future events. In the event that they get a large-scale event, I myself was actually in Cleveland a couple weeks ago, along with about 14 or so chiefs, just to talk about some things with the RNC. And obviously, I'm able to glean some things from what other people have done, what we've done. I mean, because it's all about just building on what you all know and not necessarily starting all over again from scratch, because we do have this foundation. I mean, we got the RNC, we got the papal visit, we've got many other things, and so we're not going to act like we've never done this before, and that's a benefit to not only this department, to the delegates, the people of the city, as well as the demonstrators themselves.
Just to follow up with sort of just following up on his question concerning Hillary Clinton, is there any possibility that Ms. Clinton will move to the Wells Fargo Center or to Citizens Bank Park to give her acceptance?
That would be a question for the Secretary's staff to answer.
Have you been informed that that would be possible?
I don't have any schedule of events.
Question for the managing director. I know the city has been in negotiations for liability insurance. Has a contract been entered into for that during the DNC?
No, a contract hasn't been entered into. We have received a quote, and we're hoping to enter into that contract sometime next week.
Can you provide any details about that so far?
Not at this time, but certainly after we enter into an agreement, we're certainly happy to provide those details.
For the commissioner, with Philadelphia Police primarily handling the frontline work, is that how many additional officers on average are you expecting to hold on to shifts or, pick up overtime to cover
A lot.
working around the clock, basically?
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously, we've got to adjust some of the things that we do. We still have a mission outside of the DNC. The city won't shut down because we have a convention. So we have 21 police districts that we have to contend with, where a variety of police services will be provided. So clearly, it will require some overtime to police this. But, whenever you have a convention, it's big, it's significant for both the city and as well as even the nation for that matter. And so we're going to make sure we police it properly with our partners and that everybody's safe. But please believe me that we will do it effectively and professionally.
What type of credentials will need to be worn into the protest? Will they be the engine credentials?
Into the process. No credentials. We don't, that's not a credential thing like that.
Open space.
No credentials.
No credentials, so press can go in
To the-
unidentified. I just am wondering for press going
Oh, you meant press.
into
Press are like,
protest zones, what credentials?
just as you saw last night, the press can go anywhere the public can go. And we prefer that protest for the press to come as close as possible. So there'll be no restrictions on as normal, there'll be no restrictions on where the press can go, as long as it's not interfering with police operation.
Is there any way to identify press? Like, are you guys going to be looking if there are people with cameras that aren't necessarily press, but is there any determination of credentials?
We don't get into that because it's very, very hard to identify press with blogs and so we don't involve ourselves in that.
So there's just no credential required?
No. Not within the FDR park. No vehicles inside FDR park.
But we
For
do
obvious
have-
public safety
Joe,
reasons.
we do have